Yeah, and with that, we have another very interesting story to close with today's general topics in the rundown. So the conflict between MinIO and Weka intensified yesterday as the object storage developer fired more accusations at the storage platform vendor, claiming that they are still not properly licensing this code. Although we can't comment on the merits of this case, it seems that the increasing use of open source software in the enterprise requires companies to be more careful about proper licensing and attribution. What do you think about that?
Yeah, as content creators, Max, you and I'm sure, have experienced the world of copyright infringement and have been frustrated and annoyed and pretty vexed by it over the years. I know I am constantly having people rip off my writing and passing it off as their own on their websites, and often it's shady people with link farms and things like that. It's not cool. And it's kind of the same thing when it comes to open source software. Essentially, if you're using open source software, then you are required to abide by the license, full stop. That means in most cases, a pretty simple process of disclosing which projects, which open source software you're using, sharing their licenses, and of course, abiding by their requirements to contribute your code back in some cases, or just disclosure. And I would say that any company that's using open source software really needs to disclose which open source software they're doing. And there are many companies out there that are doing this extremely well. I'm using an Apple MacBook to record this, and Apple uses a lot of open source software and discloses all of that open source software. They contribute to these projects. They've contributed their own software back to the world, and it really, really helps kind of bring us all forward. And so that's true of all sorts of open source projects. In storage, of course, we have the incredibly important ZFS software. We've got things like Ceph, and of course, MinIO, which is by far the leading platform for object storage. It is no shock to me that a company would choose to use MinIO's software as their platform for offering S3 compatible object storage, because the product works really, really well. It's really well developed. It's frankly one of the leading S3 compatible object stores out there, and even including Amazon S3. So in that case, I actually come to question when a company comes to me and says they develop their own object store. I basically, my first question is why? Why wouldn't you just use MinIO? It seems that a lot of storage companies have that same conclusion and are using it. So again, I'm not sure what the details are here. I'm not sure what Weka is and isn't using. And frankly, I'm going to leave it to them to explain what they are and to disclose what they are and to comply with the licenses. But I will say any other company that's using MinIO's code, why don't you go make sure you're compliant with that license? Why don't you get an open source trained lawyer to go through and make sure you're doing the right thing there? Why don't you contact MinIO, and why don't you let them know and let the world know that you're using this software? Seems to me that that's what they're asking for, is proper attribution and disclosure. And I think that's fair, considering that that's what the license says. And I will further say that it always does feel a little bit like pulling the rug out when an open source project changes licenses. That's what happened with the MinIO software. They changed from Apache to AGPL. And maybe some people didn't like that, but the bottom line is that these are still open source licenses. You're still able to use the software. Maybe some of the other requirements have changed, and maybe that's going to cause you to reevaluate your use of the product. But there again, I don't see any reason not to use the new stuff and abide by the new license, especially since if you're using something as critical as an object storage platform, you want to make sure that you're up to date with the latest bug fixes and patches and so on. So absolutely, in this situation, if I was in the case of any storage company that was using this, I would make sure that I was complying with the license and I'd use the latest stuff. And finally, one more thing, I could see that this might cause some concern for end users. I just want to reassure you that no one here is saying, and hopefully no one will say, that end users are at risk for using this software. It's great software. It works really well. Honestly, the only risk is if you're using out of date software that might have a security problem or something. But in no case, I can imagine, would a company basically force an end user to stop using open source software. I think that this is all about kind of the maneuverings and the market positioning and so on of companies, rather than any impact on end users using this software. So please do feel rest assured. I guess again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving you advice legally, but I would say that personally, I can't see a situation where you would be forced to abandon some sort of technology decision that you made based on what essentially is a licensing spat between two companies that will probably be resolved pretty quickly.